Great. Well, thanks everybody for having us on. My name's Stephen Crane. I'm product manager here at PRodly, and my primary focus at PRodly is to build and deliver features, products, and solutions to our customers that help really help admins build, test, and deploy changes more effectively, efficiently, safely, and quickly on the Salesforce platform. And I liken my experience back to when I was a Salesforce admin, many years ago, and primarily focused as an internal business owner, product owner over managing our internal CPQ, Salesforce CPQ build in-house. Worked a lot with internal stakeholders, gathering requirements, defining user stories, managing the backlog, planning out the individual sprints and the releases. So very similar parallels I can draw to then and to now in my current role at PRodly, only working with customers instead of internal stakeholders. And so, given that prior experience and at PRodly, just share a bit about our perspective with everybody as to what we feel are the pain points that PRodly is here to help you guys address. And this is what we call the admin dilemma. So this harkens back to my experience, and I'm sure you guys have felt the pain too as well, especially in this day and age of changing. It's a changing environment out there. Businesses have to respond very quickly, and there's a lot of pressures on admin, and they're in a tricky spot to balance the needs of the business so they can deliver on change requests faster, but also the security, compliance, and governance teams are telling them to conform to very strict change methodologies and processes where documentation becomes very important. Promoting the changes up through the different Salesforce orgs in the landscape can become time consuming. And you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders all the time, people coming at you and asking, why can't I make these changes in production, update a profile, add a pick list, add a custom field. And you have to adhere to internal policies while maintaining process and respect that your business needs to go faster and deliver change and business value faster. So, we believe admins deserve a better way. And promoting changes up through Salesforce shouldn't be as painful as it is sometimes. The last thing you need are tools that are complex to use, that are going to help slow you down because you're already managing a big backlog of work, and making those changes and testing them are already very, very time consuming. So we believe, we try to bucketize it into 3 different areas. A solution should be able to help admins automate bottlenecks and pieces of the process where you can save time. So invest in looking for opportunities to automate repetitive tasks, areas that are slowing you down as part of your overall sprint cycle so that you can release faster and more often. Changes should be tracked automatically, and there should be a source of truth, a repository that stores a set of business requirements that you can reference at a later time that relates to the series of changes you are declaratively making in the org, both metadata, data, code, and a plan to roll back those changes as well. And then the third tenet is testing, which is an area that gets overlooked. Quality often gets overlooked, both in software development and declarative development, for the sake of speed, but it really shouldn't. So having a set of processes, streamlined resources at the ready, and tools that are going to help alert you of errors during the development cycle is going to help you and help you go a long way. So all that to say, how as we as admins work smarter, not just harder, right? Given the tremendous amount of work we have to do and the pressures on us, we shouldn't have to burn the midnight candle on weekends. And one way we can go about that is changing about how we think of development on the Salesforce platform and adopt a methodology across our entire company. As admins, we don't think of ourselves as developers a lot of times. You might have heard the term Agile and used more in a software development context, but as the trend continues for click or a declaratively configured applications, that rigor and that process is equally as important when you're doing development in an org using clicks instead of code. So So it becomes very important to start thinking about this process, and Salesforce promotes Agile as the methodology of choice, although there are others like Scrumban and Kanban that are emerging, all with the goals of helping you go faster and delivering high quality features. So Agile is an iterative approach to managing projects, and takes a more people-focused approach instead of a process-focused approach like Waterfall does. So that you can take large projects and large body of works, also known as epics, and break those down into smaller work units, assign those out to tasks, to resources on your teams, where teams can collaborate more effectively within a time-boxed window called the sprint, and test throughout the cycle. So as you're making changes in your org, whether declaratively, changes to metadata, workflow rules, new custom fields, or to record data if you're configuring CPQ or FSL or other low-code applications, you take the same approach, you build in a lower environment, and then you test iteratively, also known as unit testing, throughout the cycle, and then make sure those changes aren't impacted adversely, and do regression testing as you promote those changes up. So the benefits are great in the sense that it gives you speed, agility, more collaboration, so that ultimately you can deliver more business value to your users. So a couple areas you might want to think about as you, consider, how can I start thinking about me as an admin approaching declarative config as a developer, and then starting to apply some of these development methodologies to my workflows on a daily basis. So some things you might consider here is define that org strategy up front and map it to your release path. In line with Salesforce best practices. Don't make changes directly in production, but rather develop in lower environments. Ideally, developer sandboxes. Full copies are expensive and limited, so make sure that those environments are reserved for more QA later stages, regression testing, integration testing, and use developer sandboxes to do your declarative config, make your changes, and do your unit testing. Treat data as if it were code and as if it were metadata, and treat it with the same amount of rigor. So apps like CPQ are declaratively configured. So you go in there, all the business logic is done through clicks, not code. So make those changes and follow the same release path and methodology for both data and metadata in a cohesive workflow. Test at every stage of the workflow. As we mentioned before, that often gets overlooked. So do your unit testing throughout and make sure regression testing is being done, and automate areas where you can. Have a rollback strategy if you ever need to. I mean, we've all been there when we've tried to deploy a set of changes. One, where we push the button, we get nervous because we're worried that, what's going to actually happen, or duplicate records going to be created, or things going to break. And so there's enough anxiousness there when prepping a deployment, but have a disaster recovery plan, right? Engage the right resources and team when you need to roll back as necessary, find the issue, fix, and then push those changes back out. And then refresh sandbox as often as you need to keep current with prod, of course. And it's really a people-focused approach. So like we mentioned before, Agile focuses on team collaboration and interaction over Waterfall, which is more process heavy. And because of that, it gives you the speed and the agility. So collaboration is, of course, key, and equally important in today's remote environment. And then some areas, we kind of touched on some of these indirectly in the prior slide, but areas you might want to not consider. Of course, is making changes directly in production. Avoid high risk changes. And don't discount the importance of defining your change management process. So, we don't want to implement process for the sake of process. It's there for a reason. It's there so that we can deliver value faster. So getting the buy-in from all the teams on the process that you're going to be using, and then continually make tweaks as you need to. to the process. Get the buy-in from everybody. Don't push changes without review and approval. You know, a lot of larger companies, SOX compliance, have change management practices in place that you know, the admin, the IT teams have to adhere to. You know, follow the CCR process, get the approval at the end of the sprint before those changes can be pushed through into production. So equally as important. Communication, of course, very, very important. Make sure you're communicating with your stakeholders and as the admins owning the business requirements and delivery of the change requests. Interact with them, make sure you're following up with them, you know, engaging them to do the UAT once you have the build in place and they're ready to test and sign off. And communicate those changes. And then don't forget to integrate with existing developer workflows. So, you know, again, as admins, we don't think of ourselves as developers, but developers do have a lot of experience, you know, working within these frameworks and these processes, and there's some advice and tools and tricks they might be able to provide to you. Admins and developers working hand in hand together, both to deliver on the same project is a beautiful thing. So, all right, so all that to set the stage as to where PRodly fits within this ecosystem and where we believe we can help deliver value. So our vision at PRodly is to build a suite of applications that are going to help admins go faster, more effectively, and more safely. So our ultimate vision is to provide tools that comprehensively cover the entire Agile development lifecycle, from easy tools to build and configure applications using clicks, not code, to being able to test those applications using API-based testing tools for painless regression testing, release management tools for full change management, from both user story identification to tracking those changes against the user stories, versioning, backing up those changes where you need to, and then deploying those changes seamlessly to an org with rollback capabilities if you ever needed to, and then analytics. So being able to analyze those sets of changes, record every change that's made by whom, by when, so that you have that full audit history that's required by your compliance teams. And with that, I think we're going to go into the demo. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that screen. Okay, so we're going to show you AppOps Release, PRodly AppOps Release, which is our change management data deployment application. And to kind of set the stage and some of the context, I'm going to play the role of an admin for a company called World Rafiki Safari, just for fun. And the situation is with COVID-19, we've had to pivot quickly in the way our business operates, like many others. And you can imagine travel and safari tours are down, so we have to pivot quickly. And as an admin, the changes that I make declaratively in my org do have a business impact way beyond our internal stakeholders and our teams, and impacts directly our customers and the value that we provide out to our customers. So we know things are uncertain right now. So in response, our company is introducing several new products for online virtual tours. And we're going to be applying we're going to be reducing the deposit that we require on the purchase of our services from 50% down to 10%. And that's in response to provide business value to our customers and customers who are unable to travel right now, so they can take advantage of our products and services. And the context of the changes that we're going to be making are within Salesforce CPQ. So I've received these change requests into my backlog, and I need to respond quickly. They're part of my backlog. I've assigned them to my sprint. And so I'm going to show you how you can fulfill these changes quickly without compromising your production environment. So the very first thing I want to consider when I use PRodly and where it's going to help is as I make changes down in my lower environments, say my partial sandbox or a developer sandbox, I want to deploy the same set of configuration data from my production org down into my sandbox. And I don't want to refresh the sandbox because I don't want to overwrite existing work. I don't want to change record IDs around. So I'm going to use PRodly to do that. And I'm going to deploy a set of CPQ configuration data back down into that environment. And then from there, I can make the changes that I need to make to promote those changes back up. So I've done that. I've run this deployment earlier this morning. And then what you can see here are a couple things. So on the back end, what PRodly is doing is because of the highly relational nature of Salesforce CPQ, if I'm deploying a set of new products, here you can see this is the data, the object model. So it's highly complex, it's highly relational. And what the app is doing is when you deploy these sets of changes, it's looking for any of the relationships. It's going to maintain those relationships. It's going to deploy them in the right order. And it's also going to prevent duplicate records from being reinserted into the org based on the upsert method that's selected within the data set. So the upsert method by default is an upsert. So it's updating the record if it's not inserting the record on the first path. And so of course that has the benefits of not producing duplicate records in the org, which creates a cleanup effort, of course, on my part, and then many other issues can stem from that. But because the CPQ data model is so highly relational and complex, what could have taken me, half a day, maybe a day to do this with data loader only takes me minutes to push those changes back down. And now once these changes, and the other thing it tells me here is, of course, the result of the deployment. So the overall deployment was successful. And if I click into the individual results, it'll tell me the results for a particular data set were successful. Had there been an error because of some condition that wasn't met or a trigger that wasn't disabled, and that record couldn't be inserted into that org, it would report that to me. And then I can take the action steps I need to correct that and redeploy. And then we recently launched a simulate feature by which you can simulate a deployment to double check the records that are being queried from the source so that you can make sure that the right records are being deployed in your deployment package. Now that the records are in my sandbox, whoops, sorry guys. Sometimes prep it, but demos sometimes don't always. Now that the records are in my sandbox, I'm free to make those changes that I need to. So as previously mentioned, we're going to be adding new product bundles, and I'm going to be applying a deposit or a new deposit amount. And so I've already done that work in advance. I'm adding a new product here, or a set of product bundles for virtual tours. And after I've configured, what I want to make sure I do is in the developer, or I'm in the partial sandbox, but if I was in a developer environment as well, after I make these changes, I want to make sure I'm doing unit testing in conjunction with these changes. So we've introduced a product called AppOps Test, and of course, AppOps Test is an application that focuses on API-based testing so that you can make sure any new functionality that you are building within an org isn't adversely affected by functionality that is already there. So in the context of CPQ, the changes that I'm making are I'm adding new product bundles. So I'm going to be creating new quotes in my lower environment to make sure that those products are added to the quote successfully. I also want to make sure the right deposit amount is being applied, but I might have other configuration that exists in that org. So I might have price rules that are firing, right, to calculate certain discounts. And I need to make sure that no other functionality is adversely affected by the changes that I'm going to be promoting up into my higher environment. So I can run a test run and report back the changes for a particular Salesforce object. In this case, the object I want to make sure is generating the correct values is the quote, because I am adding new product bundles to that quote. And I can see that all the results have passed, meaning that the values I would expect to be generating from the quote are in fact generating the correct values, including that deposit amount. Had there been an error, I would be alerted of that error, and I'd receive a notification, and then I can start taking the corrective steps in my lower environment to make any configuration changes that I need to make, and then retest. And then once I'm good with those changes, promote these changes up into my next environment. So once I'm ready to do that, I'm good to deploy that set of changes to my production environment. And as the admin, because I've built my data set in advance, I'm using the same data set that I used to seed the same data down in the lower environment. I can use the same data set. I can also put that data set as part of what we call a deployment plan, which is a way in which you can group data sets into a sequential series of steps, save it for later reuse, and then reference that deployment plan, and then deploy from there. And once I'm ready to deploy, the only choice I need to make now at this point in the flow is where the data is coming from and where the data is going to. And I can deploy up to 5 destinations, but I'm going to be deploying to production. So I'm only going to choose the one destination. But if you were seeding a sandbox for multiple training environments from production on back down, that's where you would use that particular feature. And then I'm going to deploy those changes. And then once I kick off the deployment, then I'm free to go about my work as an admin and move on to the other change requests that I need to work on, and go about my day. So so that is PRodly, and thank you. Appreciate it, guys.